What's going on, ladies and gentlemen? It's Scott here and welcome back to FudgeMuppet. Today I'm excited to bring back something we know so many of you have been desperate for. Today we have a brand new modded build. This is the Crystal Mage. The Crystal Mage was a highborn Dunmer turned vampire with an unquenchable thirst for blood and vengeance. He was chased from his noble life to one of seclusion and isolation. He is a master of destruction magic, learning from the very best dark elves in the whole of Tamriel. He utilizes a variety of shock spells to obliterate his enemies. Garbed in glass crystalline Vardenvel crafted armor, he is charged with ionized energy, which he transfers into his destructive talents. Combining the unique perks of the Ordinator perk overhaul and the Apocalypse magic mod, the Crystal Mage creates a tempest which devours his foes, defying gravity with levitating effects. He moves at high speeds, and when he isn't firing projectiles from his fingers, he's smashing foes with his solid Dunmer magic-infused shield. The mods we'll be using for this build are the Ordinator perk overhaul and the Apocalypse magic mod. We'll also be using the Immersive Armors mod for the Crystal Mage's unique aesthetic, and the Alternate Start mod to begin the game as a vampire in a secluded lair. Don't forget that timestamps to help you navigate the video can be found in the description alongside videos on relevant material and our social media accounts. But now, that's out of the way, let's jump straight into the Crystal Mage's race, standing stone, and stats. The Crystal Mage is a dark elf and as a result has innate magical talents. He can call on his ancestors' wrath ability once per day for 60 seconds, damaging opponents who get too close. And he has a 50% resistance to fire. His Dunmer blood also grants him a bonus of +10 to destruction, which is the primary skill of this mage's build. The Crystal Mage will use the Lover Stone early on to maximize leveling in all of his skills, as he has investments in a variety of skill categories, but afterwards the Atronach Stone is the way to go. If you're not already familiar with our love for this stone, check out our new video on exactly why it's the best standing stone in the game. The link is just below in the description. But with this stone you'll have a super useful 50% spell absorption as well as an extra 50 points of magicka. The only downside is that magicka regeneration is decreased by 50%, but for the benefits, it's well worth it. As for his stat spread, the Crystal Mage will have 40% health, 40% magicka, and 20% stamina. 40% of health will help to keep him alive, while 40% of magicka will ensure you never run low on magicka for spellcasting. The final 20% in stamina helps with bashing and shield charging, and stamina will also benefit from block and light armor perks. The Crystal Mage was born in Morrowind at the conclusion of the Third Era in the 423rd year. He was the son of a lord of House Dress, one of the great houses of Morrowind. He lived a typical noble life, rarely wanting for anything and obtaining a wealth of education from his various teachers and tutors. From a young age, he took a keen interest in the arcane arts. He was fascinated by the resident Master Mage and loved the elemental power of destruction spells. He was especially fond of shock magic, almost feeling like he controlled a raging tempest in his hands when he conjured a spell. He was always kept safe while practicing though, despite his wish that he could have full control and the trust of his guardians. The little lord was too valuable and much too young to be trusted with the full force of destruction magic. But that soon changed when the Crystal Mage turned 15. Calamity struck Vivec City and Red Mountain erupted, beginning a fall of dominoes which would jeopardize the well-being of House Dress. In the following year, the Argonians invaded and House Dress was the first in the firing line of the furious reptilian Avengers. The Lord of House Dress watched as the southern wall of Tyr collapsed against the onslaught, and he returned to his home in the Dress district to find his precious son. He knelt in front of the Crystal Mage, an expression of anxiety and fear plain on his unusually stoic face. He told his son to run away. He hurried into the mage's room and packed a bag of essentials for the journey, and then draped a large black cloak over him, pulling the cowl up to shadow his face. He told the mage to embrace what he had learned from his masters and to use whatever forces he could to keep himself alive. The Crystal Mage kissed his father and embraced him before evacuating the falling city. It didn't take long for the Argonian soldiers to learn of the Crystal Mage's escape, and they were resolute on delivering justice to all the highborn Dunmer, and that meant chasing the Crystal Mage down. He stopped for rest that night in the tavern of a small village on the outskirts of the Dress district, unaware of the danger hot on his heels. He kept his head low, hoping not to be recognized by any of the locals. He sat to eat his stew in the corner of the room, surveying the area and keeping his eyes peeled food for Argonians. As he reached the dregs of his bowl and prepared to move to his rented room, a group of armed Argonians entered the establishment with their weapons drawn. Moments later, the tavern descended into chaos. Cups of Sujamma flew across the bar, and the ring of swords escaping their scabbards resonated off the heavy stone walls. Thankfully, the Crystal Mage had been furthest from the action, and without wasting any time, he bunched up his things on the table and slid them into his travel pack. With his hood up, he slid out the back door. As he did, one of the Argonians noticed the fine stitchwork of the Crystal Mage's well-tailored cloak and nudged one of his companions to follow. The mage realized he was being tailed, and while he rounded the corner of the tavern, he broke into a sprint, heading out of the town and deep into the salt rice fields surrounding it on all sides. As he blended into the darkness of the surrounding landscape, he saw the village begin to rise up in flames, illuminating the area and helping his pursuers spot him. Fortunately, none of them had bows, so he was just about able to keep his distance. His path eventually came to an end in the mouth of a cave buried deep in a cliff face, miles from civilization. Knowing that he would inevitably tire and have to surrender to the chasing Argonians, the Crystal Mage took his chances in the cave. It was pitch black inside, the only sound being frantic bursts when he accidentally disturbed a nest of sleeping bats. He knew he couldn't hide, as his chasers had lit torches behind him, so he kept running. Eventually, when he believed he'd lost them, he realized he himself was lost. Though just ahead he saw some light. From his studies of magic, he knew it had to be forged by magicka and not natural light. He saw the tunnel open into a wide cavern, and at the very center sat a cross-legged dark elf, murmuring quietly under his breath. The ominous Dunmer's eyes opened, revealing two piercingly bright red eyes. The Crystal Mage approached him nervously, knowing that without his help, he'd never be able to find his way back to the surface. The Dunmer then began to speak in a voice that sounded like it had been stowed away for centuries. His voice was deep, rich, and filled with an eerie wisdom. He learned that this elf was an ancient Dunmer vampire who had once been a member of a noble house in Morrowind. A disagreement with his fellow counselors had ended in a bitter conflict fueled by a hunger for power and influence. The vampire's critics organized a contract with the Morag Tong to execute him, to rid him of his contradicting opinions. But the former noble had been too savvy for the ploy and escaped the city with his life, eventually leading him to his life of confinement. The Crystal Mage had tried to probe him for information on how he'd become a vampire, as he himself was fascinated with the concept, but the former noble had refused to elaborate. What he learned without any doubt is that the vampire aspired above all else to return Morrowind to its former glory, and after sharing the circumstances of his arrival, the vampire decided the encounter was fate. The fallout of the Red Year had brought him an apprentice. He mentored and trained the Crystal Mage in isolation, using the grief of his house's downfall to motivate him. When his training was completed, the Crystal Mage was given the gift of vampirism, granting him immortality and power, which when combined with his knowledge of magic, would prepare him to strike back against the Argonians. He emerged from the cave into the blinding light of day, desperate to avenge his family, but the ancient vampire advised him otherwise. Immortality would not make him invulnerable to a sword through the heart. Instead, the Crystal Mage set out to improve his vampiric and magic powers with hopes of restoring Morrowind to the Dark Elves and the Great Houses. In his travels, he caught wind of the College of Winterhold and decided this would be the ultimate place to improve his destruction arsenal. On his way to the college, the Crystal Mage finds himself some like-minded individuals, those with fangs and a thirst for blood. He uses these temporary allies of nature to give him some haven. This is where your story as the Crystal Mage begins. He will set his sights once again on the College of Winterhold to hone his destruction skill and add to his arsenal of shock spells. He will also be interested in learning the fate of Solstheim due to the volume of Dunmer refugees landing on its shores. He will complete the main quest, seeing the Dragon Shrouds as a means to expand his power and control over the mystical forces of Tamriel. And then he will complete the Dragonborn DLC, seeing it as his duty to help House Redoran restore Dunmer to glory. He will also follow the Dawnguard questline, siding with the vampires, of course, in order to further his knowledge of the infection and to increase his vampire powers. On top of this, he will strive to aid Dunmer wherever and whenever he can. As an important side note about his role-playing, which is pretty clear from his backstory, is that the Crystal Mage hates Argonians, so he'll probably plot to kill each and every one he comes across in Skyrim. Now that we know about the Crystal Mage's backstory, role-playing and faction choices, let's check out how that will affect his skills, spells, perks, and playstyle. As you know, this build utilizes the Ordinator perk overhaul and the Apocalypse magic mods, so that will drastically change the perks and spells used for this build. If you haven't gotten those already, get to the mod section on the main menu and download them. With that in mind, the main skills for the Crystal Mage will be Destruction, Block, Light Armor, and Smithing. The spells for this build involve plenty of vanilla and modded shock spells. A few familiar primary options are Chain Lightning and Lightning Cloak. Lightning Cloak provides a defensive barrier of electricity which damages any enemies who get within its radius, while Chain Lightning strikes the target before arcing off surfaces or characters into all surrounding enemies. This combination is perfect for dealing with large groups of hostiles. Some useful modded apocalypse spells befitting the Crystal Mage include Thundercrack, Electrosphere, and Lightning Strike. But thanks to the new range of destruction spells available through the mod, we suggest trying to get your hands on each and every shock-based spell that you can. The best way to do this is to buy them from Ferelda in the College of Winterhold once your destruction has reached 100 and you've completed the Destruction Ritual spell quest. As for perks, there are a ton of new possibilities thanks to the Ordinator overhaul. The Crystal Mage was taught about Magicka from an early age, and he always took an interest in destruction above all others. From this skill tree, you'll want to take the second branch up to Elemental Specialization, the fifth branch up to Absolute Power, taking every perk except for Nova Charge along the way, and then finally the Harsh Lesson perk. Some key picks here are Elemental Specialization, Magnetize, Electro-Convulsions, and Absolute Power. With Elemental Specialization, you can focus on one element, which for the Crystal Mage will be Shock, and all spells and effects of this element will be 15% more powerful, while spells and effects of the other two are 15% weaker. With Magnetize, Shock spells have a 15% chance to lift a target into the air for 2 seconds, preventing movement and looking badass. Shock spells are 50% more powerful against targets under the effect of Magnetize. As for Electro-Convulsions, shock spells will incapacitate living targets with less than a third of their health remaining, unless they are shock resistant. And finally, with Absolute Power, aiming a Sparks, Lightning Bolt, Chain Lightning, Thunderbolt, or Lightning Storm spell directly at a target will magnetically levitate them in front of you for 10 seconds, reducing their magic resistance by 25%. Combined with Magnetize, you'll be juggling your adversaries like a regular court jester. While the Crystal Mage thrives on demonstrating his immense attacking power in the form of shocking destructive magic, he doesn't neglect protecting his ass. After all, he wouldn't want some schmuck chipping his flawless crystalline armor. For that reason, he carries a trusty shield. From the block skill tree, you should invest in the far left branch all the way up to Dragon Scales, opting for both Break Their Teeth and Dragon Tail, but skipping Deliverance. Then grab Block Runner, Quick Reflexes, the entire third branch, and the entire fourth branch, but not Mocking Blow. The most noteworthy perks here are Timed Block, Apocalypse Proof, Dragon Scales, Skull Rattler, and Cast Aside. With Timed Block, the first second of raising your shield blocks 30% more damage and staggers attackers in melee range. So if you can perfect your timing, this perk is extremely handy. Apocalypse Proof builds on the effects of Timed Block, allowing you to stop incoming fire, frost, and shock spells completely if the spell hits within a second of raising your shield. The effects of Timed Blocks are revolutionized by the Dragon Scales perk, which you can take at block level 100. This perk enables you to take absolutely no damage from any attacks during a timed block as long as you have some stamina remaining. On the other side of the skill tree, Skull Rattler adds a bonus 3% of damage to all shield bashes for each point of stamina you have left, so executing one of these while you're energized is incredibly deadly. Lastly, with Cast Aside, perfectly timing a power bash to interrupt an incoming attack will send the attacker falling onto their ass, providing the ideal opportunity for a counter blow. Next up, we have Light Armor. The Crystal Mage may look intricately dressed in giant shards of Dunmer green glass, but fortunately this sturdy material makes for very light wearing. From the Light Armor skill tree, we suggest taking the third branch up into the Maelstrom and Spell Dancer, along with each perk on the way. Windrunner, Ward Dancer, and Spell Dancer deserve a special mention. With Windrunner, the Crystal Mage will move 10% faster in combat if wearing all light armor. As for Ward Dancer, he'll gain a bonus of 10% extra attack damage, stacking for every 10 seconds he goes without taking an unblocked hit in combat. As he uses destruction spells in place of standard attacks, this perk will become infinitely more useful once Spell Dancer comes into play. With this, Ward Dancer will also improve destruction spells and effects by the same amount. Lastly, that comes on the list is Smithing. In order to maintain such ornate, eye-catching armor, a steady hand is a must. From this skill tree, we recommend taking one rank of each left branch perk until you reach the all-important exotic Smithing perk. This is the one that will impact the Crystal Mage's armor choice. With all these new and exciting perks and spells in mind, let's quickly hit on the Crystal Mage's playstyle. The Crystal Mage will play aggressive, not afraid of getting too close to his foes, as he has his Vardenfell glass shield for protection. He'll move at high speeds thanks to the the Windrunner perk, shield bashing, charging, and shocking his way through his enemies. He will excel in taking his opponents out of their comfort zone, putting them in vulnerable positions before capitalizing. With his shield, he can knock them to the ground, while he can send them levitating helplessly into the air with his shock spells. As you can see from the glorious green spikes protruding from the Crystal Mage's armor, this build takes full advantage of the epic apparel additions made available through the Immersive Armors mod. This mod introduces the Vardenfell glass armor set, which is what the Crystal Mage will be garbed in. He'll wear the full set along with the Vardenfell glass shield, all of which can be crafted with the exotic smithing perk in the smithing skill tree. In the right hand, he'll obviously be using shock spells, which can be obtained from dungeons and vendors, the best of which being Feralda in the College of Winterhold. Shield bash that like button if you liked this video, and subscribe for all our upcoming modded and vanilla builds. This was our latest modded build, the Crystal Mage, so don't forget your way to the description for links to our social media accounts, links to the relevant videos, and timestamps for all your video navigation needs. Thanks so much for watching, everyone. I've been Scott, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one.